One of the big headlines of the week, Dr. Anthony Fauci's emails, thousands of them released to the public to be read anytime, anywhere, by anyone. Why? Why is this happening now? And why does it matter? Let's talk about it. Why are we even seeing any of these emails? Well, two media outlets, the Washington Post and BuzzFeed News, made FOIA requests. FOIA stands for Freedom of Information Act. This is a law that dates back to the late 1960s when there was rising public skepticism about government secrecy. You have to go back to that time. The Cold War, McCarthyism, even Nixon's Watergate. And so this was a law that was passed to give the public access, potentially, to federal records from federal agencies. And anyone can make a FOIA request. I can do it, you can do it, our kids can do it, our moms can do it, anyone can do it. But journalists tend to use this as a way to round out some of their reporting. It's important to note, Dr. Fauci is a federal employee. He doesn't have private work emails, so they're up for grabs. Who makes the decision on what to release? The federal agencies do themselves. There's not one secretive panel behind the scenes taking a look at requests and what to release. So the federal agencies do have some power in all of this. And it's important to note that FOIA has evolved over the years and there's some exemptions. So I can make a FOIA request to the CIA. They may supply emails, for example, but some of those emails might be heavily redacted because they're classified information. So just because I get records doesn't necessarily mean I get information. Now, if I feel a federal agency isn't really honoring my request, I can appeal it. And if I still don't feel like they're behaving appropriately, I can actually file a lawsuit. So why make this request? Why did BuzzFeed and the Washington Post make this specific request for Dr. Fauci's emails? We don't really know exactly what they were looking for, but one overarching theme of this pandemic has been who knew what when and what information did the public actually get, especially because it was an election year. There's a lot of politics at play. We know there's a lot of different personalities, a lot of different personal beliefs. So was what the top doctor in the nation saying in front of the cameras matching what he was saying behind the scenes? We now have 4,000 pages of emails to review. So what's the overall takeaway? What are we learning from these emails? Number one, you need to peruse these emails for yourself. There are way too many politics at play with the coverage of this story. And I am not comfortable coming to any one conclusion because I haven't read all 4,000 emails and compared those emails contextually to what was happening at the time and place in which they were written, which is what is required. I also don't think that reading 4,000 emails from Dr. Fauci is really a good use of my time, nor yours. And I'll explain why in just a moment. Based on some of my limited reading of a few hundred emails, it looks like what Dr. Fauci was saying in public more or less matches what he was saying in private. You saw some of his flip-flops on live television for masking, for example. So we have him on film of actually changing some of his thoughts about what was happening during the pandemic. There are likely huge editorial teams that are combing through these emails, looking for a bombshell or two or three. And it's important to note that with so much news about these FOIA requests, there's likely a lot more FOIA requests happening as well. So leave some space for this story. Whatever conclusion you see someone coming to over the next several days, just know that it's probably not the end of this story. And there's probably more emails to come. One of the biggest issues for critics of Dr. Fauci is whether or not he dismissed or downplayed any sort of question about China's involvement in the origin of the COVID-19 pandemic. And one of the things I did see in my limited reading of these emails is that you do have researchers raising questions about that. And these aren't fringe elements. So you really get an insight into the chaotic nature of that time and place with a lot of conflicting information, a lot of theories, and very few facts. And just what a challenge it really was. So let's just pause here for a moment. Whenever I look at a big story, I always ask myself the question, why does this matter? Because if I can't make that clear to you, then I'm just adding to clutter in the news space and not actually adding to clarity, which is what SmartHER News is all about. And I noticed an interesting takeaway that I want to share with you. So I'm going to step back from the reporting on this topic and bring you behind the scenes for a reporter's notebook. This is when a journalist opens up to you about their reporting process and shares why they're arriving at certain editorial decisions and how they're prioritizing information. I have reported on the pandemic for the last year and a half. I have listened to more press briefings and more news conferences than I even know. I have talked to dozens and dozens of doctors and scientists and researchers, some on the record and some off. I have read more studies than ever before. And what I'm looking for is patterns in information. What continues to rise to the surface, and especially rise to the surface from multiple and very different sources. And as I was reflecting on all this coverage about Dr. Fauci's emails, I arrived at an interesting conclusion I'd like to share with you. So much has evolved over the last year. Facts have changed, our lives have changed, But one lingering question really hasn't changed. And that lingering question is about whether or not China was somehow involved in the origin of the COVID-19 pandemic. And these emails underscore that this question is real, that this isn't some sort of public manifestation or some sort of conspiracy theory. Those at the highest levels of medicine and science and government have and continue to ask this question. Dr. Fauci recently said in an interview yet again that he believes this virus originated in nature, but he still has some questions. He's not 100% and would like further investigation. We heard something similar by members of the Trump administration, including the former president, former Secretary of State, who raised some questions about the origin of this virus. Now we have something new from President Biden, who's announcing a new investigation into the origins of COVID-19. And in this official statement, he says that the intel community is evenly divided between two likely scenarios: that this virus originated in nature or somehow was accidentally released from a Chinese lab. Now we have the director of the National Institute of Health in a new interview saying maybe it's both things, that the virus originated in nature but was somehow accidentally released from a lab. So there continue to be questions. You've heard that expression, where there's smoke, there's fire. So the smoke isn't going away. And it's not because of wild speculation. It's because those in power continue to validate this question without providing the public more information into why they're asking it. One of the most fascinating things I've learned in my reporting over the last 18 months is that we actually have never isolated the exact animal to human transmission for any coronavirus that causes respiratory infections in humans. And there's about a half dozen that have been identified. We can look at the genetic code and say, oh, that virus is likely tied back to bats, for example. But we've never held up the bat that's responsible for getting that virus into a human. And that's commonly accepted. One scientist told me we actually don't really need to know that. Once we get the genetic code, we can develop therapies or vaccines. So it's not necessarily paramount, which makes the fact that we're still asking a question about this virus even more significant. So we've accepted that mystery for other coronaviruses, but not this one. Dr. Anthony Fauci isn't completely accepting that explanation for this one. And so why not? We know that nature is mysterious, that it's powerful and it's hard to predict. And not every virus that has emerged from nature has somehow been accidentally released or genetically modified. And I should pause there because there's lots of different theories about China's potential involvement in the virus that causes COVID-19. Some believe it could be potentially genetically modified by Chinese researchers. Others believe that it was a naturally occurring virus that just suddenly was accidentally released from this lab. The president and other officials, like the director of National Institute of Health, are talking about an accidental release of a virus that was being studied. Sometimes these things are muddled together in the news, and it's important to note that there are many different theories. Some are connected and some are not. So let's tie this all back to the news cycle. We just learned from China that they've identified a new variant of the bird flu in April. A man had to be hospitalized because of that. We're also learning that the Chinese COVID-19 vaccine isn't as effective as they would like it to be. And we've covered multiple stories where it looks like the Chinese Communist Party is under some pressure with some questions about the future of economic development in China. And let's not forget this fact. When I was listening to a World Health Organization briefing many, many months ago, it became very clear that China did not raise its hand to the world and say there's potentially a pandemic coming. The World Health Organization has a surveillance system, and basically there was a bulletin, like a press release from what's comparable to a health department in Wuhan that was raising some concern about a respiratory illness that was being experienced in the area. That's how the world first was alerted to the virus SARS-CoV-2 that causes COVID-19. So let's go back to Dr. Fauci's emails. I'm not dismissing these emails. There could potentially be a lot of news and a lot of ramifications from these emails. We have many more things to potentially learn from them. But we have to remember these emails are backwards looking. They're looking at the past and they're focused on one man. And I want to prioritize you. Journalists should not just be focused on those in power and just have tunnel vision on their story. Our job is to tell the most accurate story for the public. And we still have a very lingering question. And this is what really matters most. Why do we continue to ask a question about China's involvement in the origin of the COVID-19 pandemic? Why do those in power continue to raise that question to the public, but not supply us with any more new information about why they're continuing to do so? And if there's even just a little chance that this virus emerged accidentally from a Wuhan laboratory, what are we doing about it? The past is important for how it informs us about the future. What really matters most about this story is the safety and security of your family and our nation. Those are the stakes. And after reporting on this topic for more than a year, that's what I arrive at. And I want to maintain crystal clear focus on that priority. We'll have more on this developing story of Dr. Fauci's emails, more as we get it. And I'm interested. Questions, comments, let me know. And as always, more on smarternews.com.